Hello everybody, this is Christian back from Blue vs. Orange TCG, coming back to you with another video. I got my hat on, it's cold in here, you're gonna have to deal with it. Yes, I know it's almost April, but it's still cold in Minnesota. It's just kind of how it is. But anyway, we're going back to with another video, and this time it's going to be a video basically with an overview and my initial thoughts and feelings about the Energized mechanic as a whole. Coming into ATP 6, we're going to be going over some of my thoughts on the different cards that support Energized, some of the different characters, what I think it's going to do to the game, what I think it's going to do to the metagame, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, a lot of different things we're just going to be doing here. It's going to be kind of just an open-end discussion video that I wanted to have about this because I think this mechanic is really cool. I'm excited to start building more and more decks about this mechanic. I think it's just overall really exciting. So going over the mechanic just a little bit. So how Energized works is its ability. It's a keyword that's triggered when a certain amount of opponent's battle cards are in their KO spot. So for example, we have this card here, Take No Prisoners. It has an ability called Energized 3 that it checks when there's 3 battle cards in your opponent's KO, and it does that line, which is do damage to an enemy. What I really like about this mechanic is it opens up a different style of play and kind of deck building that we really haven't seen in the Transformers TCG, right? So we've had like disruption decks, we've had control decks before, like hand attack, upgrade attack, all these different types of strategies, but we've never really had anything like this before in the game, where you actually are playing something like a ramp style play, where you're doing things that don't really do anything in the moment of the game, but they lead up to a really big they lead up to increase your overall strategy and play later on in the game. Excuse me. I think that's something that's really cool about this mechanic. I think something really important to look at that I've kind of noticed as I've started doing my own personal digging and testing with this mechanic is that you definitely need to understand the difference between two different types of cards that help me kind of formulate when I'm deciding to deck build and look at this archetype as a whole. Because essentially this is what this is, right? Like Energize is opening up a new archetype of deck building, right? So we've talked before how this game as a whole doesn't have like a whole lot of archetypes outside of there's orange decks, there's blue decks, there's mixed decks, there's orange black decks, there's blue black decks, there's mixed black decks. And then you have other different types of spins on those different ones. So like Herald is like as an orange white deck, or Seekers is an orange blank deck, things like that. But for the most part, it's set into that different. You pick a color and you move forward with that color, and you tend to deviate your battle deck depending on what your characters do, right? That's about the stringentness of this game's archetypes. But this really adds a new layer to it, right? Because I think this Energized mechanic is really introducing a whole idea of deck building where, okay, I'm an orange deck, but if I'm playing into the Energized abilities, if I have characters on my team that play into Energized, I'm playing a lot of Energized enablers. And I'm going to get into what I think an Energized enabler is in the game already here in a little bit, to where, okay, I'm now an orange Energized deck, or I'm a blue Energized deck, or I'm a mixed Energized deck, right? We're still playing off of those, like picking a certain color or 2 colors and moving in. You're either picking orange, blue, or mixed and leaning into that, but you now have this other axis of play that these other decks don't necessarily have, right? Instead of an orange deck is constantly building up early game pressure to hopefully KO your opponent really early. Pure decks tend to have an early to mid game pressure depending on how big their hand tends to get, while an orange Energized deck has a lot of late game potential that a lot of orange decks necessarily haven't had in the game before, which I think is really cool to see where, like, okay, I'm an orange deck, I'm still putting in early game, I'm still doing my best to kill stuff as early as I can, but now I'm also taking time off of my turns to do certain types to do these cards, right? Like I'm KOing cards out of my opponent's scrapyard, so I can have an orange piece, like an on color form of direct damage that's not Caming Crash or Plasma Burst, right? That's incredibly powerful for an orange deck. Incredibly powerful. I'm building I have a character on my team that leverages a really strong Energized ability in an orange deck, right? All these different things that I think add a really unique dynamic to the game. And going over like some of the support cards for this archetype, a lot of them are going to be in ATP 6, of course, because that's where the keyword came from. But we do have a couple from outside of ATP 6 that kind of mesh well with this strategy, I think, as well. So first things first, I want to talk to you about what I think an Energized enabler is. So there's two types of cards that I would look at when I start building Energized decks, or have been when I've been building Energized decks. I'm not saying this is the correct and only way to do it, but this is just something I've been doing to help me gauge and understand this archetype as a whole. And that's look at cards called Energized enablers and Energized rewarders. So essentially what an Energized enabler is going to be a card that helps fuel your Energized abilities. It's putting cards into your opponent's KO through this effect. So example of things like Take No Prisoners, where the first line reads KO a card from your opponent's scrap pile, pretty strong. Catch and Release is the blue equivalent to this, where instead of KOing from the scrap pile, you're essentially playing Smelt, where you play this and your opponent chooses one of their upgrades and puts it into their KO area, which in testing has been really good because scrapping a card, in KOing a card, having to choose between the two feels way different. Because the moment like, oh, I guess I'll KO my grenade launcher, or not grenade launcher, but like I'll KO my pocket processor. Like that's a rough thing to do and to have that gone forever. Having to KO a green is a really setback for the consistency of a lot of decks. And then of course we have Reverse Engineering, which is a card that we've seen quite a bit from ATP 5, which we'll probably see a lot more play here. This is kind of like the onset card for Energized, where it has the same line as Take No Prisoners, where you put a card from your opponent's scrap pile into the KO area. This one actually doesn't have an Energized rewarded ability to it. You just get to do the thing already, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, especially because this card can go into either color of Energized deck. It can go in orange, it can go in blue because of the natural, the neutral pip of white right there. Another ATP 6 card that I would say is a really great enabler is Mad Science. Mad Science is pretty unique for an Energized card. I don't think this is going to go in every Energized deck. It's going to really depend on what your character lineup looks like, mainly because it has that blue specialist icon there, so you're going to have to risk having a blank on some of your flips if you don't have a specialist on there. But it's a really strong card because this one you reveal the top card of your opponent's deck and you get to choose to KO it, but if you don't, you can put one on top of it. You can put an upgrade from your scrap pile on top of your deck. It's essentially like an extra reclaim, because it also has the Energized 4 ability of being able to play the top card of your deck. It's a really strong effect. It's going to be great, and really, I think this card's going to be good in a lot of specific decks, but it's not going to go in every deck, which is going to be good. You also have good old Chrome Dome from Wave 5. Remember that guy? This guy has Energized written all over it, being able to flip and KO an action at your opponent's card. He's kind of a hefty mid-sized guy to put onto your team, but the fact that you can just look, you get the information of looking in your opponent's hand, you get to KO an action out of their hand right away. It's a really great enabler for Energized decks. I think he's going to be a great addition to things like Titan 1 and potentially Full Con as well, if people want to leverage Full Con Energized abilities. Another ATP 6 character, Warpath here. When he attacks, you get to deal 1 to an enemy, to a tapped enemy in bot mode, but then you also get to put the top card of your opponent's deck into the KO area. This guy is essentially fueling your Energized ability every swing, which is like super excellent. If this guy can swing twice, you can essentially get majority of Energized abilities online by that time, because a lot of Energized abilities are like Energized 3 usually. So swing twice with this guy, that's 2, and you play like a Take No Prisoners, so you're already at 3. Really strong support character for 7 stars, I think, for Energized archetypes. And I think it's especially interesting because I can't picture this guy being actually that great outside of Energized mechanics. Like I think I take that back. He'd probably be really good with Sharpshooter. But for 7 stars, you kind of look at those stat lines and it looks pretty buff for a 7 drop. But I think that 11 health is really going to put him, kind of make him like the 3rd or 4th best character for a 7-star spot in a lot of decks, except for the ones that he's really useful in, of course. We also got Skids. He's a 5 drop, to where he actually, when you flip to alt mode, you get to put the top card of your opponent's deck into their carry area. And then you may put one of your battle cards from your carry area to the bottom of your deck. So this is actually, excuse me, this is actually both an Energized enabler and an anti-Energized card, because if you're going against the mirror match, whoever has Skids has already had a really good advantage for that game, because you're already going to be seeing, you're going to be having a hard time keeping track and managing your other opponent's Energized KO area, because of them always going to be able to flip Skids. He's a specialist on alt mode, so they can play Mad Science. There's a lot of really interesting enablement here with this character, as well as common. He's also one of the only like common enablement energized enablers in the Junkyard format, which I think is going to be interesting to look at as well. And then we got my boy Astro Train, who's probably the character I'm most excited for in ATP 6. You've seen me play some Astro Train on a stream the other day. Really strong character. And he's kind of like a half enablement, or like he's like a half energized centerpiece character. His flip to alt mode, each player draws a card, but your opponent has to KO a card from their hand, essentially. This ability is really good. I don't think Astro Train is going to be a character that will fully lean into the energized keyword. I guess I shouldn't say that. I'm kind of thinking my thoughts here as we go along. I think he actually could, but I think some energized decks are going to lean really heavy into getting a really huge scrap pile or KO pile on your opponent's team. But this guy, he kind of just does it naturally, where he starts KOing battle cards, and it can be like a good subset strategy for you. Like the Astro Train deck I was playing on stream recently was playing the 3 Techno Prisoners, mainly just because I knew that over time I'm slowly building up this my energized ability for that naturally. So just having that on color deal 2 is going to be really strong for a lot of these different teams. And I think like the big thing to take away from these energized enablers is trying to decide exactly which ones you want to pick for a team, right? Because I think overall, looking at the mechanic as a whole, if your opponent doesn't have anything to like prevent energize or put cards from their KO area back into their battle deck, excuse me, you're actually looking at, I think, like at least having 2 to 3 enablers in a deck, right? So if you're an orange energized deck, you're of course playing 3 Techno Prisoners. You could very well be playing 2 to 3 Reverse Engineer, depending on how heavily you want to lean into your energized ability. And you may potentially have a character, right? A character that does this. So like Chrome Dome. Chrome Dome is probably a pretty good spot for an orange deck. He has pretty good stats. He has decent survivability at like the 8-9 star range that like orange doesn't really mind to have to play around with. I don't know if an orange deck would really want to play something like Skids, because that flip to alt mode, you're really having to spend a lot of time and resources flipping him to get to those points to where you can start filling up the KO area. Warpath though might actually be a pretty good choice as well for orange decks, and blue decks as vice versa, right? You can kind of start to see like, okay, if I want to lean into the energized strategy, what types of cards do I want to put into my battle deck here, right? I'm a blue deck, I'm gonna be putting like catch and release in here, probably like 3 of them, just to constantly help disrupt my opponent and keep them off of certain upgrades that I don't want them to have, while also filling out my battle deck or my energized abilities. Mad Science, heck, maybe I'm playing Major Shockwave, maybe I'm playing like 2-3 specialists. I'm totally okay with getting, I'm totally okay with having this potentially blank pip on like a 2nd or 3rd character for having a really strong energized ability. Being able to like play the top card of your deck, stack it, and then play the top card of your deck is a really, really great reward for energized abilities that I don't think people are going to be necessarily going to be on a lot early on into the season 6 tournament format. But I think we're going to see this play quite a bit. This ability is just like too strong in my opinion to not see play over the course of the game. And of course, like even like Chrome Dome's alt ability, where if there's 3 or more actions your opponent's KO, he becomes a 7 base attacker for 9 stars, 9-10 stars. I mean, you just can't really like slouch at that, right? That's a whole lot of attack for a lot easier way to build that payoff off, over the course of the game. Now, going over the other side of the energized card pool is the energized rewarders. So these are cards that, as you build up to your energized, these are the things that you're playing energized for, right? You're playing the energized battle keyword in your deck, and you're leveraging that because you want to use these abilities to the best of your ability, right? A great example of this is Wave 5 Gruesome Legion. He gets +1 attack for each character in the KO and upgrade in any player's KO. So you can actually you can start using you can start playing like Take No Prisoners to just strip upgrades from the scrap pile. You can play catch and release. You can start playing tons of cards that like every time you play one of these energized enablers, you're not only taking away a card from your opponent's resource pool to use, but you're also making this guy a +1 attack. Every time you play Reverse Engineer, it's essentially a +1 attack, permanent +1 to Gruesome Legion. Every time you take No Prisoners and upgrade, it's a permanent +1. Every time you catch and release, that's a +1. you're starting to see where a character like this, especially in Titan 1, is probably going to be a really, really strong character who in the ATP 5 format didn't see a whole lot of play in Titan 1. He was just a little bit too slow. His ability was pretty strong. He was a little awkward for 9 stars with that rise mechanic of having a Decepticon and an Autobot. But I think with all these new Energized cards, I think he's definitely going to be a huge force to be reckoned with in Titan 1 that people should not be sleeping on. Another obvious choice, I think, for an Energized character is Ironhide. This guy, I think, is like the premier Energized centerpiece character because all his ability is all Energized. He's all about it. He's got Energized 2, 3, 4, and 6 over the course of the game. That really that heighten your game plan, right? For 10 stars, you can draw an extra card at your start of your turn if you got 4 cards in your KO area, or your opponent's KO area. And Energized 6, it's a big like time sink to get to that, but the effect is well worth it. For the first time he battles each turn, you deal 2 to the battling enemy after the battle. That's crazy. Like that ability alone is obviously worth running this character. Being able to like get playing all these Energized cards, right? And because he has Bold 1, Tough 1, Focus 1, he actually can be played in a variety of different shells. He can easily be played in an Orange Energized list. He can easily be played in Blue Energized. He can be easily in Mixed Energized. He actually might even be best in Mixed Energized because you can have the full suite of Energized cards. You can play the Take No Prisoners, you can play the Catch and Release, you got the you can probably even play Mad Science of this guy, even though he doesn't gonna get the pips. He's still you might pair him off with 2 specialist characters, and all of a sudden there you are. You start to see where a character like this is gonna be a really cool addition and a great reward, right? And it's all about the reward, right? Nemesis Prime. Nemesis Prime is one of my characters I'm most excited about for ATP 6 as well, because he's both like a pseudo enabler, or not. I guess not enabler, but he's a rewarder on both sides of his text box. Where once he has Energized 1 in alt mode, every time you KO more cards, he either gets +1 attack for an upgrade or he draws you cards. Aggro decks that can self-fuel and keep up on hand advantage is a really, really strong point of strategy for orange decks, because a lot of orange decks where they rely on the early game tend to run out of gas. But this guy, this is kind of what I've talked about, right? As an orange Energized list, where like your late game is starting to look way better and better compared to other orange decks in the game. Because as you're spending the time fueling, putting cards in your opponent's KO area, he's drawing you cards, right? You're KOing actions to help fill your hand, so you're not like, you're still remaining neutral in your hand advantage. And by that point, you have and by the mid to late game, you have a full hand of cards for potential like weapons and pumps to just lay into your opponent. And if you have a leader on your opponent's side, this guy becomes insane. He becomes a 7-16-4 because of his Energized 3 ability while battling a leader. He has insane amount of survivability against some of these leader-based decks, and leader is a really common archetype in the game. You see it all the time with Wreckers. A ton of legend decks are leaders. Have leaders as the legend mode character. Major Shockwave. I mean, you can see exactly how like, oh wow, this guy is gonna be like almost like a strong anti-meta choice for a ton of different decks. Might even be a great sideboard character, but he's a great rewarder as well. Here we have a battle card that also is like what I would call a rewarder or something you're definitely kind of striving to. This one's definitely not going to be probably as big in like full con Titan 1 formats. It's a common weapon called Throbbing Blade, where it gives you Pierce 1, +2 attack, and then if you have Energized 3 and you're attacking, you don't flip a black, you get an extra Pierce 2. So it's essentially like an inverse Energon Axe for the late game, where instead of +3 Pierce 2, it's +2 and potential Pierce 3. It's kind of a weird card. I'm not sure if it'll make the cut for a lot of like T1 and maybe even classic decks, just because it's gonna have that competition with like the Blasters, Scoundrel, Nobles Blasters, and Energon Axe, of course. But for common, it's a great card for common. Being able to like have a blue deck that plays 3 of these cards to finish off games really early if you're playing into the Energized mechanic, it's a good card to have around. And it might see some play in Classic depending on what people's weapon slots are going to be playing as well. And here we have another one. This one's kind of a weird card, but I think it's also kind of like one of the better cards in the the set too. And that's kind of like a surprise hidden support card. is Reinforced Hull, where it has the Energized 2 ability of damage can't be moved to the upgraded character, which is really big because there hasn't been a whole lot of interaction with moving damage before in the game, and having this be like something special that Energized decks can leverage is really important. As well as the upgraded character, when it's defending against Body Mode, Legend Mode, or Combiner Mode, it gets an extra +1 defense on top of the static +1 it's getting over the course of the game. Is really, really sweet because Legend Mode characters, Body Mode characters, and Combiner characters, all these, like those three types are characters that are modes that are really prevalent in Titan 1, and Full Con especially. And so having a card that you can have that basically says, okay, you can play a Legend Mode character, but I'm gonna have +2 defense, right? Having this card on to like Double Dealer when he's battling, when he's defending against Legend Mode character, he's like base 6 defense without flips. It's absolutely insane. The greens are really weird. You're definitely, unless the deck you're building has either a boat or a spaceship, you're definitely not leveraging the greens as much at all over the course of the game. But you know, you got things like Broadside. Astro Train kinda does this, but you're never really battling in the spaceship mode in the first place. But it definitely opens up for a lot of different like places in the game, right? Like Major Shockwave actually might be a great option for this because of like Mad Science, Drumming Blade, and Reinforced Hull, where instead of like really leaning heavy into the discarding outlet, you might actually be playing like Energized Major Shockwave, where you're trying to, you know, get to Energized 4 to really get your Mad Science plays to be the best that they can be. Your KOing cards of your opponent, or your discarding cards of your opponent's hand. You're KOing those cards in the scrap pile so they can't get them later in the game at all. Might be a really interesting strategy. But overall, it's just like another card I think we'll see a lot of play for this archetype. So that was like some of I talked quite a bit there, but that was like some of like the overview of the Energized mechanic as a whole. Some of the battle cards, some of the characters. We didn't even go over like everything available in the game, right? That was just like some of the really big ones. Another one is like Fighting Dirty, which is an orange action with Energized 2, and it can pretty much your opponent's secret actions can't be responded to when you play that card, so you can't be downfalled. It's just like a big bonus for orange decks to have. But a big thing that like I think I'm most excited about for this mechanic is seeing like how it's going to affect against certain matchups, right? Because we're starting to get to the point in the game where we're starting to see more decks that are playing things with a scrap pile, right? We have things like Double Dealer, whose bounty you can play secret actions on the scrap pile. Seekers, right? Seekers are all about, you know, having that toolbox and being able to grab and play things from the scrap pile when things die. Even like I think another archetype that's getting kind of big in this set is going to be Combo, which is an archetype that we really haven't seen in the Transformers TCG in a while, aside from like OA and Daring Escape. But I think some of the cards printed in this set are going to really leverage that side of gameplay that I'm really excited about, and Energized is going to be really good into that. You know, being able to KO combo pieces from the scrap pile, really big, right? Like, what is your OA deck going to do if they KO both of your overwhelming advantages, right? If you decide not to grab them, you're going to be in trouble, right? And just like a lot of decks these days play like lots of one-ofs. I've noticed, especially in the ATP 5 format. But that Energize really hurts that strategy, right? Like if you're really leaning into like having this big toolbox of cards in your deck pile, in your deck that you want to playing against your opponent, Energize says no to that, right? KOing your one of Star card, your your one of Never Give Up, your one of Particle Beam Blaster. You know, KOing maybe you're an orange deck, or maybe you're a blue deck and you play like 1 or 2 grenade launchers, get rid of those, right? Maybe you're playing against Legend Mode Jetfire and they are running like the 1 or 2 of Aerial Superiority, get rid of them. You know, you don't want to have to deal with that. You're lowering your opponent's options over the course of the game, and it's really interesting to see where that's going to go. I think it's also going to bring open more decks that are like early game pressure, right? So like we're talking about like things like Blaster. Blaster is all about that early pressure, early aggressive pressuring game, early game. That was really tough to say. High pressure early game decks. That's what I'm trying to say. So things like Blaster, things like Heralds, things like even like Astro Train, right? Sturdy Boys. Some of these decks are going to do really good into Energized because they're not going to have a lot of time to set up their Energized abilities in a fast and efficient way. And decks that are like just like their battle deck is built to be as consistent as possible, right? So I'm thinking of decks like that barely play any 1-ofs, if not like and 2-ofs, right? Decks that play lots of 3-ofs, decks that like, okay, I'm gonna make sure that these cards, in my opinion, are the best cards in my deck, and I want to make sure I can get them as best I can, right? To always have something to do during the course of my turn. And our deck's actually gonna have a hard time against that because they're never gonna be able to feel like they're removing a lot of resources from their opponent, right? I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I think the mechanic is incredibly strong. I think it's going to be really fun to deck build for and see where people go with it. And that's pretty much all I have for today. Again, this is just a really candid conversation that I wanted to have about this really exciting mechanic. I think this mechanic is so cool. I think some of the characters that are introduced in this set really bring out just such a unique way of playing the game, unique way of deck building that we haven't seen before. I'm just really excited to play for it, right? So anyway, if you guys have any thoughts on the Energized mechanic as a whole as well, leave them in the comment section below. Let me know if you want to see a specific deck profile for Energized deck. I'll be building lots of them over the course of the week. Please expect some more videos regarding these different decks as well. And overall, have yourselves a great day, everybody. Peace out.